This is the first video in a stripped down beginner woodworking series that I'm doing called Only the Basics. No fluff and no overcomplications. Worry about the nuances and the expert level information when it's appropriate. For now, we're going to focus on only the basics. Now there are a few tools that every single woodworker needs, no matter what you make. Dust extraction, a decent square, something to mark with, something to measure with, a chisel, maybe some clamps. But at the very top of that list, in my opinion, is a well set up hand plane. Maybe two. And not only are they one of the most useful tools, but unfortunately, they can also be one of the most frustrating. And that's why I've stripped down all of these details into only the basics. We're going to cover the best starter plane, basic anatomy of the plane, sharpening, setup, and simple calibration. Some do's and don'ts, some tips and tricks, and if at the end you want to search out some of those finer expert details, I'll leave you with some of the channels that I recommend for taking the process further. First up, you don't have a hand plane, what do you do? Where do you start? And I mean right at the start. Let's take a look at the choices. The first one's simple. I believe that everyone needs and can get use out of a block plane. This is basically a small plane for smaller jobs. You can buy new or old, they both work really well. The older ones are going to need a little bit more fine tuning, a bit more elbow grease, but actually that's a really good way of learning about them. And as setting up a block plane is really similar to setting up a larger plane, we're going to skip that for now. The second hand plane you're going to need is going to be a little bit larger. And try and resist the temptation to go straight for a number 4. These are everywhere and relatively inexpensive in the vintage market due to their availability. But for the purpose of this video, let's assume that you're only buying one larger hand plane to get you started. This number 4, that's not it. Don't get me wrong, it does a lot of jobs really well, but it's a little bit too short on the sole for jointing boards. Whereas the 5 or the 5.5 is slightly longer and it can still do all of the jobs that the number 4 can do, yet you can get away with jointing boards with it. The next crossroads you're going to come to is new versus old. The older planes will and should cost you a little bit less, but they're probably going to take a little bit of work to get them into a working condition. Whereas the newer ones are more likely to be a little bit pricier, but with a little bit of fine tuning will work almost straight out of the box. And it's also worth noting that there are a few differences between the newer and the older planes. Differences in design, such as in a newer plane, the iron or the blade is going to be thicker than it would be in a vintage plane. From my experience, the thicker iron tends to hold an edge a little bit better and it reduces the chattering, the vibrations that are sent up into the hand plane, which is going to get you a better finish and aid the feel of the tool in your hands. If you've gone down the older plane route, then the rest of your choices are done. You've probably got a hand plane that looks very similar to this. But if you opted to pay a little bit more money and go down the new route, you've got one more choice to take. You can either go for a low angle hand plane, like my Stanley Bailey Sweetheart plane here, or you can go for one in a more traditional shape, one that will look a little bit more like this Stanley number 5. And which one to choose? Well, there are arguments either way. And as this is only the basics, I'm not going to get into the weeds here. Either one will do a good job for you. But once we've gone through all the sections of this video and we get to the end, I will tell you which hand plane I think is the best starter plane for anybody out there. So now you've got your hand plane, you need to know what it does and how. Remember, only the basics. Let's take a minute just to talk about the anatomy. Now I recommend that as soon as you get your hands on your new hand plane or your old new to you hand plane, you should strip it down into its parts. And there's really 2 reasons for this. 1, you're going to get to know what component goes where and how it interacts with the components around it. And 2, and especially in the case of the older hand plane, it allows you to take it apart, clean it up, oil it up and give a little bit of TLC to the parts that need it. So let's take a look at the parts that make up a hand plane. This is the sole. This is what the wood is referencing to get a flat finish. So from toe to heel, this needs to be flat. How flat? Well, I'll let you into that in the calibration section, and you might be surprised. All of the other components that make up the plane are either directly or through another component attached to this sole. First, you have the rear handle or tote, then the front handle or knob. The frog sits in the middle. Some may call this the blade, it's the iron or the cutting iron, which is attached to the cap iron or chip breaker. That pairing sits directly on the frog and they're held into place with the lever cap and the cam. The cutting iron protrudes through the mouth on the sole of the plane, and the cutting depth is determined by this wheel in here just in front of the tote. This is called the depth adjust nut or the thrust wheel. Between the top of the iron and the top of the tote is the lateral adjustment lever, and this lever can micro adjust the angle of the iron from side to side. And that's it. That's your hand plane. There's going to be a little bit more about this in the calibration phase, but before we do that, we've got to do the job that is the single hardest part of getting your hand plane to work. And it's the area that puts the most people off, and that's sharpening. What I'm going to do is show you only the basics. But the way I need to do it means it's got to be broken down into two parts. First, what would I do to a brand new plane straight out of the box to get it up and running? And second, how to hone or sharpen an iron blunted through use. Blunted? Blunted. Blunted through use. And remember, it's just a procedure. And like any procedure, repetition and practice will bring along improvement. Sticking to only the basics, the things that you need to know. This is the iron. This is the bevel, and that's the back. And where the bevel and the back meet, well that's your cutting edge. So the better these surfaces are, the better your cutting edge is going to be. Let's start with the back. The back of the iron needs to be flat, but in truth, not all of it, just the bit where it meets the bevel to make the edge. But for me, I find the best practice when you first get your hands on an iron is to take the first 25 mil or so and flatten all of that. But don't worry, most likely this will be the only time that you have to do that. I'll show you why later. Now, one thing we quickly have to address, there are tons of sharpening accessories out there. But despite whatever you see on videos recommending whatever stones they're using, any of them will get the job done. All that really matters is that you find what works for you, develop a technique and practice it. For the back, you simply start with your coarsest stone, which for me is a 400. If they're diamond stones, apply some water, place it down, back first, edge second, and then just set about flattening it, or lapping it as it's called. You'll find that a figure of 8 motion is the most effective, but honestly, do whatever it is that works best for you. Now, before you move from your coarsest stone up a stone, you just have to make sure that the wear is even across the back of the iron. That will indicate that it's flat. And if you're not sure if the pattern has gone all the way across the back, simply grab a marker pen, mark up the entire back of the iron, go back to your stone and see if all the marker pen comes off. Any areas where there's marker pen left over, well, that indicates a place that's not touching the diamond stone, and that needs a little bit more work. Then simply move up the grits to remove the scratch patterns and to polish that surface further. Honestly, you're not looking for a perfect mirror finish here. You're just looking to ensure that the iron has a flat back and it's got a decent polish on it. Now, I mentioned that moving forwards, this would be the only time you would do this. Really, it is only the bottom 5 millimeters of the back of the iron that is really important. The bit where the back meets the bevel to make the cutting edge. This isn't my trick, this is one that I've seen lots of people do. You basically take a thin 150mm ruler, lay it on the edge of one of your stones, lower the iron down. I'm starting with my medium grit here, the 600. You just start working the back again. And what's happening here is that the ruler is just lifting the back of the iron up, so only the first 5 mil or so is actually touching the stone. And what you can see is another strip of polished metal coming up at the end of the back of your plane. That's the bit you only have to concentrate on from here on out. So I'm going to take this up to the 1000 grit, get this finished, and then we'll move on to the next section. So now we need to work on the primary bevel. This bevel normally comes to you at 25 degrees. And now we open a bit of a can of worms. I said at the start, this is only the basics guide for everyone. And with that in mind, for sharpening the bevel, I'm going to suggest a honing guide. You tend to see experts sharpening freehand, and that's fine. They may also tell you that it's quicker and easier, and that's fine too. But the learning curve is steeper than using a guide. So that's why I suggest starting with one of these. Once you lock the iron into the guide, what it basically does is it keeps it at a set angle, and that takes out the human error. And for the bevel guide, you can either set it off the bevel itself by flattening it down onto a stone and then adjusting it, which isn't the recommended way. Or there's actually measurements online so you can set up stop blocks to help you set one of these and get the same angle every single time. And regimenting that angle for future sharpening is going to save you a lot of work. And that's really why I've lent towards this honing guide from Veritas. mainly because it comes with this additional attachment that actually sets the bevel angle for you. But it is pricey. And know that one of the cheaper ones will get the job done just as well with a few extra jigs that you make for it. For this guide to work, all you need to do is set the guide to the right angle and then push your iron in, right up to the stop, and then tighten it down. Once it's tightened down, you can take away the guide and you're good to go. Now the honing guide, running on its wheel, when you lower the iron down, will ensure that this is always at the 25 degrees that you need it to be to work on that primary bevel. And then just like the back, you just work it through the grits from the lowest to the highest. The idea is you work it back and forth until you have one solid bevel across the bottom of your iron. Then we know we've covered the entire bevel. And then once you're happy with the primary bevel is completed on the first stone, and again, use the marker pen if you need to here, move up through the next two stones. For me, 400, 600, 1000. The 600 and 1000, I'll do about 30 passes on each. It's just to remove the scratches and get that surface polished a little bit further. And that is the primary bevel done. But don't put too much pressure on yourself here because it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. The important thing to note though is between each of the stones, never take it out of the honing guide because you need that angle to be absolutely perfect to save you a lot of work. And what takes the pressure off that primary bevel is the fact that we're going to use a secondary bevel. And if this is your primary bevel, a secondary bevel is just a slightly steeper slope, only up the first 1 to 2 millimeters of your iron. Every time you come to sharpen your iron after use, this is going to save you a heck of a lot of time because you're only sharpening a tiny amount of it instead of the entire primary bevel every time. Now to create the steeper angle, you've got to adjust the iron in your guide. And if you've got one like mine, you just change the guide from 25 to 30 or adjust the camber on the wheel, which will do exactly the same job. Or if you're using one of the more cost-effective guides, on the block setup that I recommend, having one at 25 and one at 30 is perfect. It doesn't take a huge amount of work here to start creating a primary bevel. 5 to 10 strokes and you're going to start seeing it. And then just check that there's a nice thin, shiny line being created at the end of your primary bevel, right at the cutting edge. I will just do a couple of passes on the 600 and then a couple of passes on the 1000. And once again, with only the basics in mind here, long term, I would suggest adding a slight camber to this secondary bevel. This just ensures that the two corners of the iron don't dig in when you're working. But for this, let's check out some of the links to the experts later. Let's stay with only the basics. And now we can polish. This is a step that is often forgotten, but is absolutely vital. And fortunately, it's really easy. Get yourself a strop and some polishing compound. All the strop is some leather glued onto a wooden backing. And the polishing compound, well, it's usually sold with it. Load the strop up with the compound, and with a nice firm grip, we're just going to polish the secondary bevel and the back. And like before, we're just going to sneak up on lowering the edge on at the back. And on the front, you're just going to tilt it up until you see the edges making contact with the strop, and then draw it back. Any scratching means you've gone too high or too low. You just want it to slide across the surface. You want to be firm, but you do not want to compress the leather, otherwise that will round up around the edge and ruin it for you. And this is now a fully set up iron. You could test it by shaving your arm or simply just grabbing a piece of paper, just seeing if it slices it rather than tears it. You don't want to check it on your arm too many times because if you've got a lot of hand planes, you're going to run out of hair. Probably took a bit too much there. And please remember, this is just the very basics of setting up the iron just for the first time. Don't feel that every time going forward you're going to have to do all of that again. Because if you sharpen little and often, it is far better than letting the iron dull all the way down and then doing it. It's going to be easier on the sharpening process and it's going to be better results on your work. Imagine you've just dulled your iron through use. Sharpening from here is just as simple as popping your iron into the guide, setting it for 30 degrees to the secondary bevel, hit the 1000 grit stone for a little bit of a fine tune, or if you've dulled it a bit further, hit the 600 then the 1000, work on the secondary bevel as we did before, then get your ruler out and do the back, and finally the strop. With a little bit of practice, it's going to take around 2 minutes to get a dull iron back to super sharp. So now your iron's ready. Let's get the hand plane set up and calibrated. For this stage, we're going to focus once again on the traditional style plane, but in all honesty, for the low angle, it's much the same. Once again, this is the sole. This needs to be flat. But contrary to what some people say, this doesn't need to be perfectly flat. Whenever you get a new plane, you should take the sole with all the parts attached so it's under tension, so not quite like this one, And you should get a flat surface like this flooring tile. And with high grit sandpaper, you should go about flattening the sole. You can use the scratch patterns to see flat spots and hollow spots, or simply use a marker pen again like we did on the iron. But as I said earlier, not every single area needs to be flat. So here, once again, are only the basics. The toe needs to be flat to reference the start of the motion on the wood. The area in front of the mouth needs to be flat to compress the wood fibres before they hit the iron. The area behind the mouth needs to be flat, as does an area of the heel to use as a reference point through the end of the cut. And importantly again, these 4 areas need to be on the same plane as each other. You don't want any twisting on the bottom of your sole. And all of this will show up by using the sandpaper on a flat surface. It's absolutely fine to see hollow areas inside here and here, but overall the marker needs to disappear in these 4 spots. As you can see, mine has. So I'm going to get good reference from it. Now your traditional style hand plane has a removable frog, whether it's old or new, whereas a low angle plane has it ground right into the sole. And with basics in mind, again, I'm going to keep it really simple. You can, on these traditional style hand planes, loosen up the frog, and using one of the screws at the back, you can move the frog forwards and backwards. What this does is it increases or decreases the opening of the mouth. On a low angle plane, it's far simpler than all of that. Because on a low angle plane, you can actually unscrew the front knob, and using the lever, you can open and close the mouth by moving the sole itself. To me, honestly, this is far better, but definitely not a deal breaker. If you're just getting started, I don't believe that this is a battle you need to worry about right now. With basics in mind, when you set your frog back in, I like to keep it flush. And by that it means that it's going to hold the iron against the back of the mouth and keep it probably about as open as it's going to be. Once you get used to it, you can experiment by moving it forwards and backwards. The basic idea here is though that if you want to take thick shavings, you do need to ensure that the mouth is wide enough open to ensure the shaving comes through unhindered. And that's fine for straight grained wood. But if you're working with a trickier grain, and maybe on a wood where the grain is moving in different directions, you might want to close the mouth right down to avoid any tear out. There are other intricacies, but this is only the basics, and at the end I'll point you in the direction of finding out some extra details if you need to. The frog supports the iron and the cap iron combination. So we pop our cap iron back onto our iron, slide it down to approximately 1 millimetre apart. And for orientation, you want the bevel to be showing on one side and the cap iron or chip breaker to be shown on the other. And another quick tip here is to ensure that there is no gap between where the cap iron meets the iron, otherwise that's going to get clogged with shavings pretty quick. Simple solution, just take your cap iron over to one of your sharpening stones and flatten off the underside where it meets the blade. Now you can place this on top of the frog, being very careful to protect the edge. And with a traditional plane, you're going to want to do this with the cap iron facing upwards. And then you can lock it down with the lever cap. Now using the adjustment wheel behind the frog, wind the iron back so nothing is protruding through the mouth. Now we can start to calibrate the cut. And there's one habit I want you to get used to from the very start. Whenever you wind the iron back up, so anti-clockwise, always give the wheel a couple of turns until you feel it bite. That way you're going to be stopping any slop within the mechanism. And this is absolutely vital for the best results. And for the first calibration, we're going to need to have the plane upside down so we can look down from the toe to the heel, looking down at the mouth. And what you're going to want to do to get yourself started is move that wheel clockwise. And what we're looking for is the moment that the iron comes up through the mouth of the sole. If you've got the hand plane facing towards a nice light surface, you're going to see the iron coming up as a thin black silhouette. And what you're looking for from this silhouette is that it's coming out nice and even. If one side is protruding more than the other, use your lateral adjustment lever just to angle it so that it's flat again. And then wind the whole iron back in again. And now we can take the iron over to a piece of wood. And as we move across the wood here, we're just winding the wheel at the back so that the iron is gradually getting closer and closer to the wood. And we do this until we take the first thinnest shaving. It's unlikely that the shaving and the calibration is going to be absolutely perfect here, but that's okay. Next, we're going to focus our shaving once on the left-hand side and once on the right-hand side to see if one side is sticking out further than the other. So first of all, a pass from the left, and that shows a fairly thin shaving, and then a pass along the right, And now I'm not taking a shaving. So I know the iron is further down on the right than it is on the left. So with my lateral adjustment lever, I'm just going to correct that slightly. And remember, to bring it up on the right, you need to move it to the right. And then I'll do the same again. You might find that neither side makes a pass, or you've overcompensated it and you're taking an incredibly heavy pass on that side. You may find this takes quite a few passes, but eventually you'll get one pass where the shaving comes out pretty evenly across. And again, sticking to the basics, if your shaving's too thin and you want to take a slightly thicker pass, use the wheel to move the iron down. If you want to take a thinner pass, use the wheel to move the iron up. But remember, if you're moving from a thicker to a thinner and moving the iron up, remember to take that backlash out, or the mechanical slop, just by moving the wheel in the opposite direction a couple of passes until it bites again. Honestly, that one tip changed handplane woodworking for me entirely. I had no idea. And with that in mind, here are some more, and hopefully they're going to make a difference for you too. Number one, remember, a handplane is like a surgical tool. Take your time. Don't try and take everything off in one pass. Remember, it removes the high spots first. So although you might not take a lot on the first couple of passes, once the high spots start to level out, you're going to take a lot more. Give it 5 or 6 passes to see exactly where it's calibrated. And when you do adjust it, only a fraction at a time. It's very easy to remove wood. It's much harder to put it back in. Tip number 2, feel the grain or inspect the side of the grain of what you're about to handplane. You'll see the fibres will either come up and away from you or come up towards you. You want to be moving with them away from you, like stroking a cat. Number 3, protect your newly honed edge at all costs. When you attach the chip breaker, approach from the side, not straight on. Number 4, and this is a controversial one. It's been taught for many, many years that when you put your handplane down, you place it down on its side. This is to protect the iron from dinging itself on anything on your workbench. So here's my take. If, like me, you've got metal on your workbench of any kind, be it dog hole stoppers or anything, then yes, place your plane on its side. Or raise the toe up on a block so that the iron is nowhere near anything metal, anything that can damage it. But if you have an entirely wooden workbench, a hand tool workbench for instance, I would suggest placing it sole down. Because there's nothing on your workbench that's going to damage the iron. Putting it down sole first means that you're not going to risk knocking any of the iron out of alignment by putting it on its side. Tip 5, declog the mouth of your plane whenever you need to, whether it's every pass or every 3rd or 4th pass. That way you're going to get much better results. And 6, as an extension to this, if you feel the need to wipe anything off the sole of the plane, go from heel to toe, never the other way around, heel to toe. Now number 7 is another big one, game changer if you like. But fortunately, it's simple. Wax. Applying wax to the sole of your handplane means you're not working against friction. You're only feeling what you need to feel and putting the effort that you need to put in. I use a simple tea light candle. Number 8, stance. I handplane like this all the time. It's a quick way to fatigue, and fatigued arms make mistakes. Far better to handplane with your entire body. What you're doing is you're using your entire body weight to drive the handplane rather than just your arms. Number 9, slice, don't bludgeon. There are cases where a handplane works best dead straight, but there are times where you're going to run into some uneven grain or even end grain. And these are times where slightly skewing your handplane will get you better results. You see, the angle blade slices through the fibres rather than tearing them out. Number 10, back to sharpening very quickly. If you use diamond stones or water stones, make sure they are very well lubricated. But with your diamond stones, wipe it off after use, and that's going to stop any rust. And no matter what your sharpening method is, always wipe the iron down as you change grits in either direction. So now we've covered the basics, the question still remains which handplane should be your first. A lot of that depends on what you're actually making. I mean, how are you planning on using the plane? But if I was forced to choose, from my experience, I would say that the very first handplane that I would recommend is a low angle, new Stanley Sweetheart plane. The iron's more forgiving while you're learning to sharpen. Opening the mouth on the sole is far easier than adjusting the entire frog on a traditional style plane. It's a good length for most jobs. But it does come at a price, so budget is going to have to play a part. And with that in mind, do remember that a vintage number 5 is perfectly good. And I promised I'd give you some recommendations for further watching. And please, if you do watch them and you're not getting the same results as they get straight away, remember they've been doing this for years, decades in most cases. I started out watching Rob Cosman and Paul Sellers. They give a huge amount of advice spanning hundreds of videos on all sorts of hand tools. Then I found Jonathan Katz-Moses, Rex Kruger and Wood by Wright. But the person who I learnt the most from and whose style suited me the best out of anybody was Matt Esley. If you were to only watch one, I'd recommend him. Hopefully there's been something for everyone in this. Hopefully I've taken away some of the hurdles to your hand plane journey. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments. If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing here on the channel, head over to the website, link in the description, sign up for the email list. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you on the next one.